So let's talk about why your business may not be potentially fundable, or why some businesses are not fundable. So there's a fundamental thing when it comes to business financing that a lot of people miss by a long shot. And that's the concept of thinking that when they go into business, that right away, if they have a great idea or product or service, they'll get some financing. And at times, individuals make a very big mistake, and they make the mistake of using their personal guarantee to finance some of those businesses. Now, what ends up happening, right, is that because due to the fact that they sign as a guarantor for that business, individually, if the business fails, their personal credit takes a huge hit. And that's a powerful blow to the personal credit side, because when you have to reestablish your credit, it can take a long time. It can take some months on end. And when it comes to your business, well, it's gone, right? It's a bye-bye overnight. It's not something that you can bring back from the graveyard to make it pay for the debts that you personally guaranteed for. Now you're liable for it. So in this video, we're going to discuss 5 principles as to why your business may not be potentially fundable. Now, when I say potentially fundable, I mean in the concept that, look, if you have a business, a viable product or service or an idea, it's not enough for financing, right? What you need is a lot of different factors that go with that concept to make sure that your business, first of all, something that's long-term, because we always talk about long-term in this channel, right? So that's one of the concepts that I want to bring to your mind when it comes to your business, is that if you have a business and it's long-term and the idea itself is sustainable, the lenders will feel more at ease to offer some financing solutions, right? Especially when it comes to that business concept. So that's the first thing we're going to talk about. The second thing we're going to talk about is the concept of the market, all right? What area of the market are you in? What sector is it, right? Are there lenders aggressively giving in that market space? Are there financing solutions that individuals can go out there to open a business in that particular space and easily get access to financing and possibly investors, right? So that's the second thing we'll talk about. The third thing we'll talk about is the financials of the business. And the reason I say that is because at the end of the day, your business has to be profitable and lucrative, right? So a lender, what they do is on a basis of how lucrative your business may be or potentially high volume of revenue it may be, they'll offer you different alternatives to financing, right? And depending on what the type of business is and who you're servicing, there's alternative options of financing that can be arranged so that you can move on with your business, such as factoring, invoice financing, all these type of situations, right? The fourth factor we'll talk about is asset protection element, right? So a lot of these business owners, what they do is they actually use a personal name, and they have these companies that they register, and these type of companies that they register have all sorts of assets in it, right? So there's a trick that I use with my customers, that they can actually combine a business, but have different assets held under one entity and a business held under a different entity as a management company. And that separates a lot of creditors and people who are going to file judgment for some forsaken reason to protect themselves, right? So that's one of those things that you got to really be creative about when you start your business. And you have to have, all these type of tools in place before you even start, renting or leasing a place to operate your business, especially if it's a brick and mortar or a restaurant type or some sort of, product or service based business that requires your customers to physically visit you. And then the final component we'll talk about is the paperwork. Right, so a lot of people are afraid of this particular content, and by no means am I an attorney. I'm fully disclosing that to you guys, but the reason why I say this is critical is because a lot of people miss this concept, and they think that when they go into business, they'll worry about the paperwork later. When they make money, they'll hire an attorney and they'll fix it up later. And the problem with that is if the paperwork is not proper from the beginning, what ends up happening is you'll suffer tremendously if there's a lawsuit, especially if creditors are running after you because payments are missed, et cetera, et cetera. So we're going to look at those type of concepts and break them down and finally explain to you why some of these businesses are not fundable, right? We're going to break the myth into why some of these businesses need, to look at different avenues to get the financing they need in order to operate their business. And it's a given, right? It's a given that a lot of individuals in the United States, and mostly in the world actually, the startups, sometimes it takes 4 to sometimes even, 7 years before they actually start making profit. And during that time, if they survived for that long, that means that they were financially very frugal. Their businesses were, tightly bootstrapped. They didn't have a lot of different things going for them. And they're just in the progress of that part where they're going to make profit. And during that time, bad financial choices are made sometimes by owners. And what ends up happening is businesses do shut down. inevitably causing the business owner to seek alternative options to create the wealth or make income. And during those 7 years, perhaps they have taken income or perhaps they have not. But the sole fact of is that, if you start a business and if it's particularly a startup, one of the biggest critical things that'll help you survive during those tough times, help you go through the phase of evolution, through the growing pains in your business from startup to, let's say, where we talk about you're an operating business at that point where you're making profits and turnovers and customers and you have some sort of assets built over time. And we talked about a video below this video, guys. You'll see an entrepreneurship video that I shared with you guys. And past that point, you're talking about growth stage, right? But it all starts somewhere. And funding is one of those things that a lot of people are struggling with. And they think that fixing their personal credit needs is going to solve that funding problem for their business. And that's the complete opposite that I want you to start thinking about after this video, right? So by the time you're done watching this, you'll have some sort of idea and knowledge on how to take this information and depth of information that I'm sharing with you. Do your research, of course, because that's one of those things you have to do. And figure out for yourself whether or not you want to take this adventure on starting your own business, or if you already have an existing business, what are some of the alternative ways that you can finance your business so that you can survive and prosper at the end of the day, right? It's not just a question of survival and paying your bills. It's a question of building your wealth. And I'm confident that perhaps you wanted to start your business because you had the idea of building wealth in your mind from the beginning. It wasn't something that you just came up with throughout the time that you were doing your business. So if you want to prosper and grow your wealth and build that business, you have to really think about the financial opportunities that are out there and what you can do to leverage that so that the banks, the creditors, the investors can offer you the opportunity to partner with you on the long-term basis with the financial solutions they have for you as an added value and resource so that you can grow your company. Okay? So let's start with that. So our first point we talked about is the concept of your business. When you're starting it, are you personally guaranteeing it, right? So the reason why you don't want to personally guarantee it is because, number one, if there's liabilities that you owe as your business owes, it can fall on your shoulders. There's judgments that can come after you if the creditors decide to sue you. And commercial creditors are different from personal creditors, right? Commercial creditors usually deal with a larger volume. There's more business risk for them. So if they have to sue you, they will pursue you in court. And it's going to hurt because now you're personally guaranteeing that, which means they can sue you, seize your wages, your possible assets, all these type of things through a judgment. And that can hurt you a long, long time. Right? You have to clear that mess. Sometimes individuals have to go through the phase of filing a bankruptcy. And one of those opportunities that you have to clearly understand is during the bankruptcy phase, if you have assets such as a home and all these type of things, you can be limited to the amount of information, or protection that you're eligible for under the Bankruptcy Act. A lot of people misunderstand that. They think if you have a home, you're okay. You have assets, the bankruptcy and the creditors, during that phase, the creditors can't come after you, all these type of things. Now, that depends on various different states and jurisdiction and the state laws on bankruptcy protection. But in general, bankruptcy is a federal state, federal matter. And even though it's filed in the circuit courts and the courts in your state, the creditors, they operate on a federal level, right? So they can sue you on a federal level as well as a state level. So now you'll be buried in paperwork. And of course, there are certain things that's going to cause a lot of damage in terms of, pursuing and protecting yourself legally. And there's going to be a lot of headaches in terms of paper trail, the trial dates, all these type of things. You'll be more stressed, right? So be very careful about personally guaranteeing a business. That's one of those things that's a very sensitive topic. Not a lot of people will share their knowledge about that because, again, they haven't been through the phase of looking at customers, bury themselves in paperwork from their creditors, getting sued, your assets seized, their wages garnished, long enough for them to personally witness that through their customers to give you that insight. Unfortunately, I have, and I'm not saying fortunately, I'm saying unfortunately because one of two reasons. Number one, I don't like my customers to suffer during that situation, but the upside to that is that information is a shared experience that you can learn from. So that's the first step. Never, ever personally guaranteeing a business financing. The second thing I would say is, look at the market. So if you're in the business and you want to get some financing, you have to look at, is this market getting a lot of liquidity? Or is there a lot of volume of transactions happening? Are there a lot of confidence from the investors or the lenders in this market space? And in this situation, I'm going to give you a tactic that I think is very useful. A lot of people don't employ this tactic because they're not quite familiar with how to do it. But I want you to go and call some of the institutions around your neighborhood and the market space that you feel is going to be very lucrative for you, wherever you want to start your business. let's say if it's not in your neighborhood and it's somewhere else, but you wanted to open that store or business somewhere else, you want to call local financial institutions, credit unions, and community banks within that local region and ask them and speak to the branch managers, set appointments, sit down or speak over the phone. Doesn't necessarily have to be with underwriters, but possibly communicate with those people responsible who are in the business financing department and ask them the questions of, hey, look, what's happening and what are some of the most common businesses that are getting the financing? I'm considering getting into the space. Do you have some tips? What are some of the things that I can do to make it more accessible for me to offer, obtain the financing that I need, and these type of things. And the worst thing that's going to happen is they'll tell you, hey, we don't work with these type of businesses. And you'll go through some banks, private and institutional, and they'll tell you different opinions and ideas. So the best thing for that is the fact that you just now learned if the business is actually something that you can pursue because you have some financial backing in the marketplace already proven, and there's a lot of enthusiasm and interest and confidence in that business model. So that's one of those ways that you have to do your research. So it does take dialogue. So you have to go out there and communicate and conversate. So you cannot be afraid of that. You have to take that step to do it, because if you don't, you're missing a very critical point on why some of the businesses are not fundable. All right. So the first we talked about, like I said, don't personally guarantee it unless there's, we're going to talk about some of that as a bonus, but there are certain conditions that are met. The second thing we talked about is the idea of the market, right? Is the market space, allowing you to kind of, that confidence, with lenders, institutions, investors, even with a lot of volume and liquidity in the marketplace. The third thing we talked about is the financials, right? The financials are critical because I think that if you have to get into business, you have to get organized in terms of, what are some of the things that you can do to put yourself in a position where if your business is profitable, the margins have to be good. And it's proven, right? Like, of course, you're doing your market research, but the margins are so high enough that, if lenders have to wait to get paid or they'll be in line, they know that that debt is going to be for short term, right? Because the profitability in that business is very high, it's very lucrative. So they're not scared. So you have to think about the margins that you're playing with, the financials in your business. If the margins are not necessarily that high, there's a lot of risk there. And the risk is that you can actually default faster, because now what happens is if your margins are low, it's going to take you a long time to pay that debt. And chances are you're going to get discouraged because you're not seeing that cash flow. But if the margins are high enough and you miss one or two payments, that's okay. Because at the end of the day, the cash flow is there. When you make an impact with that and you see high margins, you have more confidence because you feel, oh, well, I just have to turn over a few others and I'll be good with my debt load. So it's not a question of the numbers on its own. It's a question of the mental confidence. When you see numbers and you see, amounts deposited in your bank account that are larger than usual because you have high margins, you can make that business work. So that's another reason there's a lot of businesses fail and they don't get the financing because their margins aren't all that there, right? So the fourth thing we discussed was the concept of, putting together the asset protection, right? So the asset protection is essentially when you start a business, right? Let's say, I'll give you an example. If you're a restaurant owner, if you have a restaurant, you have equipment that you buy for your restaurant, you're leasing the equipment, and then you have, your staff, you have the lease, all these type of situations, right? A lot of business owners, and there's a tactic that nobody will tell you about, but a lot of business owners, put everything under one LLC, or that structure. And that's great. You can do that. It works. You can build financing in that, and that's great. But what I typically tend to tell my customers, especially on the high-end consulting side, is, look, don't do that. If you're starting a restaurant, if you're dealing with equipment, inventory, all these type of things, you want to have that on a separate LLC. You understand what I'm saying? So you want to hold your assets, particularly the equipment and all these type of things, on a separate LLC. And you want to have the restaurant entity with signing the lease and all these type of situations on a separate entity. So you have a management LLC and you have operating LLC, right? So you have these two different type of LLCs, each individually having their own designated roles. One of them is basically holding equipment, assets, all these type of things. The other is operating the business day to day. So if something happens, this business is signing the paperwork, but this essentially is holding the assets. You're essentially transferring the assets here. Because most of the times, if you're buying equipment, you're doing with your own cash. If you're getting equipment financing, then most probably it's going to be in the operating LLC. But the type of assets that are free and clear should always be transferred and held under the business, the asset LLC, which is holding the assets for the business. In that sense, what you're doing is you're creating a sense of protection that's a layer. It's going to be more difficult for creditors to pursue, because if they're pursuing this operating LLC that doesn't hold any assets, it's going to be hard because now they have to go through the litigation and prove that this LLC is the one that they have to they have to sue. But this LLC never signed. Therefore, just because it's holding assets doesn't necessarily mean it's anything. So you have that paper trail, which is number 5. Point number 5. You have to have legitimate paper trail. You have to create structures and paperwork, and don't wait until an attorney's in your hands or lap once you're profitable, because that may never come if you're not ready, right? Once you are profitable, you can do more enhanced asset protection. But for the beginning, you have to think about the paperwork. How are you going to structure it? How are you going to organize it so that you stand alone to protect yourself before you even start into the business, right? Because if your paperwork is right, your operating LLC is there, your asset LLC is there, you have an agreement between each other, you have an operating agreement for yourself as an operating company, some of the expectations, the guidance, the governance, how your employee plan is going to be, how are you going to hire, what are some of the expectations, the training programs offered, what are the systems to operate your business, what are the key principles in your business, what's your long-term vision and a plan for that business, what are some of the projected deadlines and timelines and quotas and milestones that you want to reach. Sounds like a mouthful, right? But again, you're dealing in business, right? So this is some of the things that you have to expect going into this business. Now, it can be one of those reasons, it can be all of the reasons as to why a lot of businesses don't get the financing they need. Number one, they're not prepared. So there's a lot of loopholes here and there, and it's not really complete. And lenders don't necessarily have the time to sit down and coach you through what you need to do. That's not their job. Their job is to say, look, you're a business, you should know this by now. By the time you're sitting across my desk, you should have everything ready so that we can offer the financing. So the criteria for lenders, you have to look through that and understand their criteria before you even approach them. Because when you follow the criteria, it's like a key. It would make sense, and they'll give you the lending depending on the credit limitations during that quarter of the bank. Some of the times what I like to do is go to FDIC, look at some of the bank's performance possibly, right? Or even the SCC, it depends on what type of institution they are. And I'll see what kind of lending limitations they have. I call them and I say, what are some of the unsecured or secured credit limits that you offer this quarter? Is there a lot of volume of business? What are some of the business volumes that you've done in the last quarter? Can you give me some examples of businesses that you funded? You have to take the appropriate dialogues and conversations and start them in order to get the information that you need to succeed. So I hope that you guys understood as to why a lot of businesses are not fundable. So just to go over them one more time. The first is never personally guarantee, and we're going to talk about the bonus step. Only personally guarantee if you've built significant assets that are not necessarily needed for your survival. These are secondary type of assets. And you can bring those assets from an LLC and guarantee your company financing with that LLC, not your personal guarantee, right? So that's one. Number two, all right, so we talked about never guarantee. Number two, understand the market. Is the market having a lot of volume of business transactions? Are banks confidently lending? Is there a lot of enthusiasm and confidence in the marketplace? Are investors excited about that kind of business opportunity or model, right? So that's the second thing you have to keep in mind when it comes to financing. A lot of people miss that by a long, long shot, right? The third thing we talked about is the financials. If you have higher margins, it's a mental confidence as well as the creditor's confidence to say, well, we can get paid back if certain missed payments happen because the margins are super high. The fourth thing we talked about is asset protection, right? Are you protecting yourself? Are your operating LLCs different? Is your equipment LLC and asset LLCs different? Do you have proper paper trail, which is the fifth option? The documentation, the plans, what are necessary? Are you organized? Is there a business system in place, right? So all these type of things are critical for you to get the financing that you need for your business. And you have to plan all this ahead of schedule. You don't want to do it the day you start your business because then you'll be busy trying to prepare. And by the time you're running your business, you won't have the time to do it because you'll always rationalize on the idea that I'll do this later, right? So think about that. And these are some of the reasons why a lot of businesses don't get financing. Of course, there's a lot more than that, but we do that in my mentoring and coaching programs. I just wanted to give you the insights so you guys can learn. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and turn that bell icon on if it's your first time here, and if you want to get more videos like this. And leave a comment below of some of the strategies that I shared with you that you learned is helpful for you. What would you implement right away? And what are some of the feedbacks that you have for me if I haven't mentioned it in this video? With that said and done, guys, this is Ali Tarafdar, your guide and mentor. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.